All right, welcome back to the Woodshed. I'm John Lamberton. Today I'm going to be talking to you about rhythm as it comes up in the Chicago genre known as footwork or juke. And so this is just going to be an introduction to some basic concepts in footwork that I think are interesting and important that I want to elaborate on in future videos. But yeah, let's go ahead and get started. So in this lesson, I'm going to just introduce you to some sort of reductive definitions of what footwork might mean stylistically, and then I'll be laying down some foundational rhythmic concepts for future videos. So the ones I'm going to talk about are cross rhythms and implied polytempos. So more on that in a second. But first, what is Chicago footwork? Well, basically, this is kind of something that emerged out of Chicago house in the 90s, and it's both a dance style, sort of like dance form that's of a competitive nature. It's very virtuosic and sort of technically oriented, and it happens in a battle context very often. And then the music is, something that works in tandem with it. They have a sort of synergy. And so this is like a very fast house music that's rhythmically complex and highly syncopated, kind of angular, and it's almost always at 160 beats per minute, sometimes a little bit more, a little bit less. But the sort of synergy between the dance community that does this sort of competitive dancing and the track making community, there's certainly overlap, but it really seems to work in tandem such that the scene is very prolific and it's constantly sort of re-innovating the form. And so I think it's a really, really, really interesting genre of music. That being said, if you listen to it around most people, they might get anxiety attacks. That's not uncommon. A lot of people get really stressed out listening to it because it's very up tempo and hyperactive. Frenetic is the word that everybody says, but I'm not going to be the guy that calls it a frenetic genre of music. Anyway, so this is totally a reductive definition because there's a huge amount to it. If you want to become more familiar with it, check out the greats like Traxman, RP Boo, DJ Rashad, DJ Spin, DJ Manny, DJ Elmo, all the DJs, and you can get a sort of feel for it. And I say this because I'm a white dude from the West Coast who makes algorithmic death metal, and so I'm not the most authentic person to be talking about this necessarily. I've never been to Illinois, period. That being said, I've listened to this for almost for years exclusively sometimes, and so I've thought about the sort of structural and rhythmic and formal elements a lot, and I don't think that I have the same perspective that the greats from the community would have. Mine's probably a little bit more academic and nerdy, but who says that there can't be overlap there? So anyway, just a little disclaimer that I'm not part of this community. I don't really know sort of the inner workings that directly, but I have a super great appreciation for the genre. So I'm saying that it's a sort of fast house music that is defined by its complex rhythm. So what do I mean by complex rhythms? That's rather vague. Well, basically there are a lot of specific devices that I will get into in future videos, or like recurring sort of rhythmic tropes and that type of thing, like the tech life swing or that type of thing. And I'll elaborate more specifically and sort of deep dive on specific concepts like that. But right now, the sort of basic ideas I want to convey are cross rhythm. And when I say cross rhythm, like if you look it up on Google, it basically just says that a cross rhythm is a polyrhythm. I'm not here to be nitpicking definitions. I don't think that's interesting. But what I mean is basically some sort of incomplete polyrhythm or pulse field, or like a truncated polyrhythm. Basically, it's rarely palindromic, and it's usually more kind of like something that wasn't allowed to play out because there are multiple loops happening. So it's like there's a loop that doesn't get to complete because another loop is completing. And so the example I'm going to go through with this is basically a 2 plus 2 plus 3 rhythm that's really central in a lot of footwork. It might be 3 plus 2 plus 3. It can be any ordering of that, but I'll be looking at 3 plus 3 plus 2, and how this could be derived as a sort of cross rhythm that's just a polyrhythm that wasn't allowed to finish. But also talk about some of the interesting proportion stuff that goes into this. And so that brings me to the next topic, which is what I'm calling sort of like polytempo, or I'm jokingly saying over tempos and under tempos, like overtones and undertones. So that would be like the harmonics and subharmonics of a period. And so in the case of Footwork being 160 beats per minute, you could think about basically like a half-time feel or a double time feel. And those are just, multiples of 2 from our 160 beats per minute. So if you said half time or quarter time would be 40 beats per minute, basically. But similarly, we can do this with other, harmonics besides just 2, which is the octave. We could do it with 3. And so that's the example I'll be focusing on, is basically going up or down a perfect fifth in the rhythmic domain, and how that going down a perfect fifth is essentially, a perfect fourth if you think about it ascending. And so this can be expanded on really, with no limits. And that's the stuff that I'm going to sort of like slowly get into in the future videos. But I wanted to start off with a simple one of, up or down a fifth, basically. So here's 3 plus 3 plus 2. And so this is super, super common in Footwork. And it might be expressed like, 3/8, 3/8, 2/8. Or it might be like 3/4, 3/4, 2/4, and maybe it takes 2 bars to resolve. Or, you could speed it up. So I have basically this 3 plus 3 plus 2, and then I have 1 octave faster than that below it. And so let's see if I can get 160 beats per minute out of nowhere. Something like that. And it could be staccato, it could be legato, it could be whatever. But this is an interesting rhythm. And why is that? Well, first of all, let me just say that musicians oftentimes reduce the complexity of the rhythms that they're talking about. If you're dealing with a bar of 11 and then a bar of 7 or whatever, maybe it's easier to think of that bar of 7 as some sort of rhythm that comes down to either, short or long, like 2 or a 3 length multiple. So it's almost like you sort of reduce everything to Morse code. So 7, 8 instead of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, which is an issue because 7 has multiple syllables. So it doesn't work out as smoothly when you get beyond 6. So in the case of 7, you might be like, oh, I'm thinking of this as 4 plus 3 or 3 plus 4. And then that 4 could be reduced yet again to 2 plus 2. So, you can do 7, 8 with many combinations of 2 and 3, whether it's 2, 3, 2 or 3, 2, 2, etc. And so this reduction to just longs and shorts, if you want to get into the music of Meshuggah and understand that type of stuff, you really need to be able to reduce things to just, basically something like quarter notes and dotted quarter notes, or, eighth notes and dotted eighth notes. Basically, the duple and then something that's 50% longer than that. So that's where dotted notes come in. And so, in the case of a quarter note, if you look at a quarter note and you look at a dotted quarter note, basically by adding that dot, all you've done is extend it to be 50% longer. And so, this is interesting because what happens when you do the opposite, you make something 50% shorter, which means that you make it 50% faster as a rate. So if you have a frequency, let's say, an A440, and you go 50% higher than that. So you could, do basically 440 times 3 divided by 2, or 440 times 1.5, whatever, you're going to get 660. So that's a pure fifth, a perfect fifth. Do, do, do. Sorry, I'm not a great singer, but if you make the frequency 50% lower, then basically that's going to yield a pure fifth going downward, or, the opposite direction. So this is kind of hinting at that idea of the overtones versus the undertones. And so by adding a dot to a duration, like we just talked about, that's essentially going the opposite direction from a triplet. So a triplet is essentially going a perfect fifth up because it's 50% faster, and going the other direction is like a perfect fifth down, which is equivalent to its complement, a perfect fourth up. And so that's by doing 2/3 of the speed. So this is kind of interesting, and this is an introduction to polytempo, basically, because if you do everything at the tempo, like if you basically treat the dotted notes as the pulses or as the sort of reference pulse, then that's going to change your tempo, from say, like if we have a tempo of 60 beats per minute, much like going to 120 beats per minute, that's an octave up. So if you did, 60 to 90, that's a perfect fifth up. And if you did 60 to 80, that's a perfect fourth up, or 60 to 40 would be a perfect fifth down. So you could extend this to use tuplets or whatever, but that's for another video. And it's unfortunate there isn't something like a dotted duration for 20%, the way that there is, like a, what is it, a 6/5. So anyway, here's some more stuff. This is a 3-bar cycle of basically just groups of 3 on top, and so they aren't written out all as dotted quarter notes. I have a dotted quarter followed by an eighth note that's tied to a quarter, that is followed by a quarter note that is tied to an eighth note, and it ties over the bar line. That's because normal notation people like to see the bar line. They like to see sort of an implication of where the middle of the bar is. I think for somebody that gets that the dot just means, make this 50% longer in duration, I think that type of person would be happy to see just a dotted quarter note. But anyway, so the reason it's a 3-bar phrase is because in 4/4 with groups of 3, it's going to take 3 bars to resolve. So if we go back to our tempo, it's a little bit slow. Da 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 da, repeat, da 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 da. Okay, so you basically are able to fit 8 notes in those 3 bars. So you can view it as groups of 3 that are repeated 8 times, and then the backdrop of the 4/4 meter is basically groups of 8 that are repeated 3 times. So either you have 8 groups of 3 or 3 groups of 8. Now, on the bottom, I have half note triplets here, and people mistake the triplet for the dotted sort of 3/3/2 rhythm that I'm talking about a lot, because they hear 3 rhythmic impulses, and so it's like pretty similar. And to be exact, it's an 8-to-9 ratio. So you're able to fit 9 of these half note triplets in the space of 8 of the dotted quarters. And to sort of take it back to the polytempo type thing, this tempo relationship is essentially a major second, like do re, in just intonation. So basically a C to D or an A to B. That's what this 9/8 or 8 against 9 sort of relationship implies. So the thing is, nobody in Footwork really does 3-bar phrases, except for me, I guess. But if we were to smush it into 2 or even just 1, what happens to the rhythm? Well, you can see here basically, if you just delete the second and third bar, making this 3-bar cycle into a 1-bar cycle, then we get our 3/3/2. So, instead of just a string of dotted pulses against the normal pulse, we have it truncated such that it's 3 + 3 + 2. And this is kind of a possibility for why this type of rhythm is so omnipresent in most dance musics, because it kind of gives a little bit of a push to it. You get all this syncopation that seems to push and propel the tempo in a certain way. And I think that this sort of thing comes down to the cross rhythms and, not letting a polyrhythm fully complete. Because, you might be able to sort of get some cool polyrhythms going, but like getting a group of people to do that, or like getting, really just getting that into your fingers can be quite difficult. And it has this sort of, quality about it where it's palindromic. And so, if you did not get it right, it's not going to line up. And so this is an interesting thing because it borrows from different pulses. Sort of, we talked about like Denman Moroni's pulse fields in a previous video, and that type of thing can sort of be truncated into these rhythms that, they have some of the pulse field or the polyrhythms multi-tempo type thing going on, like it's polyperiodic, but then it has a correction at the very end. So in this case, it's a pretty simple correction, and it just makes it 3 + 3 + 2 when that 2 would be tied to a 1 that's part of the next 3 that goes over the bar line, but we're truncating it. So this type of thing can be systematically exploited in so many ways that gets really interesting sort of rhythms for dance music. And so that's what the future videos will often focus on. But I want to summarize here real quick what we've talked about. So Chicago footwork is basically a genre of music and a style of dance that tends to be very technical and competitive, based on very complex rhythms that are anchored at 160 beats per minute. That's the standard tempo. And this is something that, sort of emerged out of Chicago house in the 90s. And so when I say complex rhythms, most of this is sort of truncated polyrhythms or cross rhythms of some sort. And we can reduce all those polyrhythms or truncated polyrhythms to basically 2s and 3s, like sort of short and long, almost like Morse code. And so other tempos can be implied, or sort of we can borrow a tempo for a little bit, much in the way that Denman Moroni does in his pulse fields. And so the example I give in this presentation, or that I gave in this presentation, is dotted notes, which make something 50% longer, or triplets, which make it 50% faster. And so, longer you can interpret as slower. And so you could think of this as the triplet being the perfect fifth of a tempo instead of a tone, or pulse instead of a pitch. And the perfect fourth interval, is essentially, it's your dotted rhythms. So that's kind of, it's like a plagal rhythm, if you will. And so I think that this is a cool way to hint at other tempos that sort of are a counter pulse to the dominant 160 pulse. And I'll explore how to imply all sorts of other tempos in future videos, like how do you do footwork that is effectively or functionally at 160 BPM, but doing it at 110 beats per minute. And you might say you can't, but you can, and I do. So I'm going to show you how. For next videos, I'll be focusing on footwork rhythms for a little bit longer. But if there's anything that you want me to talk about for the Woodshed, whether it's harmony, rhythm, composition, improvisation, whatever, let me know what's on your mind in the comments, and I will do my best to make a video of it. But future footwork topics I'll be talking about are more about truncated polyrhythms and implied tempos. I want to take those to sort of weird places that you wouldn't expect, that involve some number crunching, but then also basically rhythmic transformations like permutation or rotation, or various processes like that, because doing 3-3-2 is just the start. When you listen to some of the stuff by Traxman, it's some crazy strings of rhythm that then you could rearrange any way that you want, basically. So it's a very there's a lot of potential in this rhythmic space to create new stuff and just sort of apply a low effort process to it and generate something even, still new. And so another topic is the effect of hidden tactus, and hat tip to Calder Hannon of Metal Music Theory YouTube for this sort of name for this topic. And I think that this is a really cool effect where it's essentially like a rhythmic epiphany where you don't know where the grid is, and then suddenly you see the grid and you're like, oh, I get it. And then lastly, of course, polytemporal juke. If you want to get a flavor for this, check out my stuff under the name Carry Tracks. I have a bunch of stuff that is, basically indulgently complicated polytemporal juke. So yeah, anyway, thanks for watching. And if you haven't already, please consider subscribing to the channel, commenting on the video, leaving a thumbs up. Helps with the algorithm, spreads the content to new viewers, etc. If you want to support the creation of this Woodshed content or the Bridge podcast, head over to patreon.com/Lambertronics, and the options start off at just a few bucks a month. So all the support is appreciated. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video.